Amongst the violence of the French Revolution, order broke down. People were looking for a solution. That solution was Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon, born on the island of Corsica, a French possession, quickly rose to the rank of general in the Revolutionary Army. He became the national hero of France. When the Directory proved incapable of ruling France, Napoleon took power himself. In a coup d'etat, a blow to the state, Napoleon said he saw the sword of state laying on the ground and picked it up. Napoleon takes control and begins ruling France as a dictator, even going so far as to have himself crowned as the heir to the Holy Roman Empire. And when the bishop came to place the crown on Napoleon's head, Napoleon took that crown from the bishop and symbolically put it on his own head. This was his way of saying, I wasn't granted the power by the church, I took it. The question is, how does a nation that is built on the principle of republicanism so quickly devolve to a totalitarian military dictatorship? Well, Napoleon did do some things that were good for France. He did establish order, particularly economic order. Under Napoleon, the government's budget was balanced for the first time in anyone's memory. And he set up a national bank. He actually stabilized the economy, and things were looking good. Since Napoleon was a military man, he understood the importance of merit-based promotions. Napoleon had earned his promotions. And when he becomes emperor, he begins promoting officials based on their merits rather than their bloodline. This is something that people liked. He also welcomed a lot of people back into France that had fled during the French Revolution. People that had been deemed enemies of the state by the French Revolution were now allowed to return to France, so long as they promised loyalty to Napoleon. While the French revolutionary government was very secular, almost anti-religion in a lot of ways, Napoleon is not anti-religion. He does, however, recognize religious freedom. In France, you were welcome to worship as you wanted to under Napoleon's regime. However, in order to please the Catholic base, he did agree to recognize Catholicism as the faith of the majority of the Frenchmen. So, while Catholicism wasn't the official faith of France, it was recognized with a place of preeminence. Legally, Emperor Napoleon established the Napoleonic Order. The Napoleonic Code gave the country a single set of laws. Anywhere in the French Empire, everyone except Napoleon was under the same law. And that was a big step forward. But it wasn't all good. Napoleon also restricted the rights of women to hold property. So one step forward, two steps back. Napoleon, being a military man, set his eyes on building an empire. He ultimately wanted to control all of Europe. And he was pretty successful. Very quickly, he takes over parts of Italy, Switzerland, and ultimately he even wanted Great Britain. He built the largest empire since the Golden Age of Rome. Britain is going to ally with people that had not been traditionally their allies. Britain is going to form an alliance with Russia, Austria, Sweden, and Prussia in order to try and stop the spread of Napoleon's France. War was declared on France in 1803, and the Napoleonic Wars were in full swing. What's most amazing to historians about Napoleon is how fast he rose to power and how fast he fell. At its largest, the empire only held for 5 years. Napoleon made some tactical errors. He tried to invade Russia in the wintertime, something that Hitler's going to try later on, and many other empires have tried. Invading Russia in a Russian winter is always hard, and the French army wasn't prepared for it. How did this little emperor manage to lose his power so quickly? Well, he made a few key mistakes. The first mistake was he established something called the Continental System. This was aimed at bankrupting England, bankrupting Great Britain. And the thought of this was that he told all of the French empires in there that they could only trade inside the empire. They could only trade inside the continent. So he blockaded Britain from trade. As a result, England, who had a much more powerful navy, responded with a blockade of their own. And they began blockading the entire European continent, bankrupting Napoleon. And suddenly all those economic gains that he had made early on in his empire, they were all lost as farmers were unable to get goods or sell goods. Starvation is terrible. It weakens the economy of places like France and Germany and other lands that Napoleon had controlled. And the people rose up against Napoleon. His second major mistake was in his peninsular war against Spain. He attacks the Iberian Peninsula, and he defeats it fairly quickly. But he makes a couple of errors. He makes his own brother Joseph king of Spain. This is not going to work well on the Iberian Peninsula. The people of Iberia, of Spain, are very nationalistic, and they saw this as a slap in the face to them. The people of Spain rose up in guerrilla warfare against the Spanish army, and ultimately Napoleon is going to lose about 300,000 men as nationalism becomes the most powerful weapon used against Napoleon on the Iberian Peninsula. His third mistake is one that we've already addressed a little bit, and that was his invasion of Russia. Tsar Alexander I had refused to comply with the European system, and he had continued to send grain to Great Britain. After all, that's his economy. Napoleon decides to try and force Russia to stop, and he sends in an army of 400,000 men to try and take Russia in June of 1812. As the winter starts to set in and this battle that he thought was going to happen very quickly stretches on for months and months and months. The Russians began what they called a scorched earth policy in September of 1812. And as the Russians fled back to Moscow and Napoleon's army is chasing him, they burned the crops behind them. Napoleon's plan was to feed his men off the land. With no food on the land, his men starved. At the Battle of Leipzig, the Grand Alliance of Great Britain and Russia and other countries managed to finally completely defeat Napoleon. And in April of 1814, Napoleon was removed from power. He gives up his throne, he surrenders, and he's exiled to the island of Elba. It's a tiny island nation off the Italian coast. This should have been the end. But Napoleon, the charismatic leader, is going to rise one more time. There were people that were still loyal to Napoleon, and when he managed to escape from his island prison and return, King Louis the 18th, the restored King of France, had sent out an army to arrest Napoleon. Napoleon, at least according to the story, stepped before this army and said, "If any of you would raise arms against your rightful leader, let him do so now." And no one raised arms. Napoleon turned that army that had been sent to arrest him, marched back on France, recaptured it within just a few days, and he was declared Emperor of France again. King Louis fled the country. The restored empire of Napoleon lasts about 100 days. The Grand Alliance is preparing for war, and ultimately at the Battle of Waterloo, they do defeat Napoleon again. And on June 8, 1815, when Napoleon is defeated by the British and the Prussians this time, he is shipped to St. Helena, another island off the coast of Africa, way off the coast of Africa, where he's going to live in exile for the next 6 years before dying of gastric cancer. The age of Napoleon is over. What are the long-term effects of Napoleon? Well, Napoleon had redrawn the boundaries of Europe. The Congress of Vienna meets in order to restore the old boundaries, and they didn't restore all of them, but they did restore a balance of power. Kings were at least temporarily placed back on the throne, and France was contained. This was kind of the last hurrah of France as a major world power. The world is not going to trust France for a long time. It's very comparable to the way the world saw Germany after the First and Second World War.